For most of the time our species has existed, we were not the only humans on Earth. We fixed that. About 300,000 years ago, a person walking across what is now Morocco shared this planet with at least 6 other kinds of human. Different skulls, different bodies, different answers to the problem of staying alive. Today there's exactly one kind left, and you're it. The fossil record has a very specific way of describing the years in between, and it isn't flattering. 6 species, 6 disappearances. In every case, the timing lines up with the arrival of one particular primate. It had just walked out of Africa carrying a new toolkit and an unusual talent for showing up everywhere. Before we finish, we'll get to the 2 species you're carrying inside your body right now. Your ancestors didn't just meet them, they had children with them. Start about 25 miles northwest of Johannesburg, in a South African cave system called Rising Star. In 2013, 2 recreational cavers named Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker squeezed through a vertical crack in the dark. They dropped into a chamber nobody had entered in a very long time. The floor was covered in bones. Reaching them meant passing through a chute roughly 8 inches wide at its narrowest point, about the width of a cereal box. The excavation team ended up being 6 slender scientists chosen partly on the basis of who could physically fit. What they pulled out was over 1,500 bone fragments from at least 15 individuals of a species nobody knew existed. Lee Berger's team named it Homo naledi, pronounced naledi. Naledi stood about 5 feet tall, curved fingers built for climbing, feet almost identical to yours, and a brain roughly 1/3 the size of the one you're using right now, somewhere in the neighborhood of an orange. That combination wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Small-brained humans were meant to be ancient history by then. Then the dates came back, and the story stopped being tidy. The bones are between 335,000 and 236,000 years old. Our own species shows up in Africa right around 300,000 years ago. Naledi wasn't a distant ancestor. Naledi was a neighbour. How 15 bodies ended up in a chamber that hard to reach is the entire fight. Flowing water didn't carry them in. Predators didn't drag them down there. Nobody has produced an explanation that satisfies everyone. Berger's team went further in 2023. They claimed Naledi deliberately buried its dead deep inside that cave and carved marks into the walls. A large part of the field pushed back hard, and the claim is still unresolved. Nobody has demonstrated that we met them. Nobody has demonstrated that we didn't. What we have is an overlap in southern Africa that lasted at least 50,000 years. Hold on to that word. Overlap. It does a lot of heavy lifting for the rest of this video. Now go north and back, way back, to the longest running human species that has ever existed. Homo erectus appeared roughly 2 million years ago and refused to go away. It spread out of Africa into Georgia, into China, into the islands of Southeast Asia. It made the same style of stone hand axe for over 1 million years with barely a design change. That's either the most stable technology in history or the most stubborn. It had a body built like yours. Long legs, short arms, made for covering distance on foot. It was also the first human species to leave Africa at all, and the first with solid evidence for regular use of fire. Everything about the way humans survive outside the tropics traces back to that population. Between 1931 and 1933, a Dutch team worked a bone bed on a river terrace at Ngandong, pronounced Ngandong, in central Java. They dug up 12 skull caps and 2 lower leg bones. Those are the last known Homo erectus anywhere on Earth. Figuring out how recently they lived turned into a 40-year argument. A study in 1996 put them as young as 27,000 years, which would have made them our contemporaries. Another in 2010 pushed them back past 500,000. A team led by Jan Rizal and Kira Westaway settled it in 2019, with 52 new dates published in Nature. The Ngandong bone bed formed between 117,000 and 108,000 years ago. That result is quietly devastating. Our species didn't reach nearby Sumatra until somewhere around 73,000 to 63,000 years ago. The redating pushed the two of us apart by tens of thousands of years. The handshake everyone wanted probably never happened on Java. Except Erectus may have gotten into your genome through the back door. Denisovan genomes carry chunks of DNA from a much older human population, one that split off long before Neanderthals existed. One hypothesis, and it's only a hypothesis, is that the source was Homo erectus or something close to it. If that holds up, and if you carry Denisovan ancestry, then the oldest widespread human species on Earth reaches you by a route nobody expected. Here's a number worth repeating to somebody tomorrow. Homo erectus ran for about 2 million years. We've been going for about 300,000. They lasted more than 6 times longer than we have so far. We are not the successful ones yet. We're the new ones. About 1,600 miles northeast of Java, on the island of Luzon in the northern Philippines, there's a species we can barely describe. Homo luzonensis, pronounced Luzonensis, was announced in 2019 by a team led by Flores. The evidence is 7 teeth, a handful of hand and foot bones, and a piece of thigh bone. That's the whole thing. The entire scientific record of an entire kind of human would fit in a shoebox with room to spare. The toe bones curve, which suggests climbing. The teeth are strangely small. The body was small too. Original dating put the remains at 50,000 to 67,000 years old. A 2023 reanalysis by Rainer Grün and Chris Stringer argues the fossils soaked up uranium after burial, making them look younger than they are. Their estimate runs to 130,000 years or more. Somebody was butchering rhinoceros on Luzon 700,000 years ago. We have the cut-marked bones. We don't know who held the knife. Our species reached the Philippines by roughly 47,000 years ago. Whether we walked into a valley and found somebody already living there is unknown, and on tropical islands where bone rots fast, it may stay unknown. What we do have is a genetic fingerprint. An indigenous people in Bataan called the Aita Magbukon, pronounced Aita Magbukon, carry the highest level of Denisovan ancestry measured anywhere on Earth. It runs roughly 30 to 40% above indigenous Australians and Papuans. Multiple kinds of archaic human were in those islands. Some of them left descendants, some of them left 7 teeth. 400 miles south on the island of Flores, the story gets stranger and considerably more famous. In 2003, an Australian and Indonesian team went into a cave called Liang Bua, pronounced Liang Bua, hunting for evidence of the human migration to Australia. They found a nearly complete skeleton of an adult female who stood about 3 feet 6 inches tall, shorter than the average American second grader. Her brain was about 1/3 the size of yours. The bones weren't even fossilized. One researcher described the texture as wet blotting paper. They called her Flo. The species is Homo floresiensis, pronounced floresiensis, and for about a decade a serious chunk of the field argued she was just a modern human with a growth disorder. That argument has mostly collapsed. The wrists, the shoulders, the feet, and the jaw all belong to something that split off from our lineage a very long time ago, stand at the mouth of Liang Bua 60,000 years ago, and every scale is off by about half. The elephants are dwarf stegodon, roughly the size of a large cow. The rats are the size of your neighbour's tabby. A stork stands there looking you level in the eye. Komodo dragons work the riverbed, and those are still around today, and the people at the back of the cave come up to somewhere around your belt buckle. They aren't children. They're adults with adult tools, adult hunting plans, and adult teeth ground down by adult food. In that cave, you're the strange one. The original dates said they survived until 12,000 years ago. That would have made them the last non-sapiens humans on Earth by a wide margin. A 2016 reanalysis in Nature demolished it. The skeletons run from about 100,000 to 60,000 years old. Their stone tools stop around 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago is also roughly when our species starts moving through that region. The hobbits vanish at that point. So does the stegodon. So do the giant storks and several vulture species. A whole small world ends at once and something new arrives at almost exactly the same time. No remains of our kind turn up at Liang Bua until about 11,000 years ago, so nobody can put us in that cave at the right moment. The coincidence just sits there, refusing to be explained away. Now the 2 species where the evidence stops being circumstantial, because we can read it in your blood. In 2010, a team sequenced DNA from a fingertip bone the size of a lentil, found in Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. It belonged to a girl from a human population nobody had ever seen. We named them Denisovans, pronounced Denisovans, and then spent 15 years knowing their genome without knowing their face. The face took a while. In 2019, a jawbone from Bashir Karst Cave on the Tibetan plateau came back Denisovan, dated to about 160,000 years ago. In 2024, a rib bone from that same cave was dated to somewhere between 48,000 and 32,000 years ago. They were still up there breathing thin air while our ancestors spread across Asia. Then 2025 delivered the payoff. A massive skull had been dredged out of a construction site near Harbin in northeastern China in 1933, then hidden down a well for most of a century. In 2021 it was named Homo longi, pronounced Longi, the dragon man. Kiame Fu's team pulled mitochondrial DNA out of the hardened plaque on its teeth. Dragon man is a Denisovan. Heavy brow, huge square eye sockets, oversized teeth, and a brain every bit as large as yours. That same year, protein analysis identified a jawbone dredged off the seafloor near Taiwan as another one. Siberia, Tibet, Laos, Taiwan. This wasn't a pocket population in one valley. It was a continent-wide kind of human, and 15 years ago we had no idea it had ever existed. They're also still here, in a very literal sense. People in Papua New Guinea carry close to 4% Denisovan DNA. People live year-round at 14,000 feet on the Tibetan plateau, nearly 3 times the altitude of Denver, without their blood thickening into sludge. Part of the reason is a gene called EPAS1. Tibetans inherited that gene from Denisovans, a species that vanished tens of thousands of years ago, is still keeping people alive today. Which brings us to the one everybody knows. Quarry workers blew open a cave in Germany's Neander Valley in 1856 and found bones that didn't look right. Heavy brow, barrel chest, thick curved limb bones. It took decades for anyone to accept what they were looking at, which was proof that we'd had company. Neanderthals held Europe and Western Asia for roughly 400,000 years. They lived through ice ages that would have finished us. They made glue by cooking birch bark, a process that takes real control of heat. They used pigment, and some researchers argue they painted cave walls in Spain 64,000 years ago, though that dating is still contested. At Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, one man survived for years with a withered right arm, blindness in one eye, and probable deafness. That only happens when other people are feeding you and watching your back. On average, Neanderthal brains were slightly larger than ours. If you met one on a trail in what's now southern France, the strangeness wouldn't be the brow ridge. It would be the width. The chest comes at you like a barrel. The forearms are thick the way a farrier's forearms are thick. The face pushes forward, built around a nose big enough to warm freezing air before it reaches the lungs. Then he looks at you, and there is obviously somebody home. He's holding a spear he made and wearing hide he cut and prepared himself. You would not have mistaken him for an animal. He would not have mistaken you for one either. Physically, it isn't close. A Neanderthal was shorter than you, wider than you, denser than you, and stronger than you by every measure we can take. In a fight, you lose. And we lost the first round. Modern humans reached what's now Israel around 120,000 years ago. They buried their dead in caves at Skul and Kafze, pronounced Kafze. Then that population drops out of the record entirely. Tens of thousands of years later, Neanderthals are living in those same hills. Whatever happened out there, our first push out of Africa didn't hold. The version of us that eventually walked into Europe was the second attempt. It showed up with better projectile weapons, trade networks running hundreds of miles, and bone needles for sewing fitted clothing. Our species pushed into Europe around 45,000 years ago. Neanderthals were gone by about 40,000. 2 studies published in Nature and Science in late 2024 pinned down what happened in between. Researchers worked from the oldest modern human genomes ever sequenced, from Ranis in Germany and a Czech cave called Zlatý Kun, pronounced Zlatý Kun. They dated the main period of interbreeding to roughly 47,000 years ago, running for about 7,000 years. Every person alive today with ancestry outside Africa carries 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA from that window. The mixing stopped when they did, so we come to the word in the title. I want to be careful here. because the honest answer is more uncomfortable than a simple one would be. There's no murder weapon. Nobody has found a Neanderthal skeleton with our spear point in it, and a signed confession. One rib injury from Shanidar Cave gets offered as a possible projectile wound, and it's still argued over. Violence between groups almost certainly happened, because violence between human groups always happens. It just isn't what the evidence points to as the main event. The leading explanations are quieter and worse. Their populations were small, scattered, and inbred. Estimates for the total Neanderthal population at any given moment generally land in the tens of thousands, spread thin from Spain to Siberia. That's fewer people than fill a single college football stadium on a Saturday afternoon, stretched across a continent. Ours were larger, better networked, and arriving continuously from the south. Modelling work shows what that does. A small sustained edge in birth rate or death rate erases a small population inside a few thousand years, without a single act of aggression. Add competition for the same animals in the same valleys during a stretch of brutal climate swings. Add diseases moving in both directions between groups with no shared immunity to each other's germs. Then add absorption, because every time a Neanderthal had a child with one of us, that child grew up in our group. That lineage stopped being theirs. It works the way an invasive species works, not a war. An eviction that nobody involved would have recognised as an event while it was happening. That's the pattern across all six. A shrinking range, a thinning population, a last valley, a last island, a last cave. In most cases, we don't even get a final individual. We get a layer of sediment where the tools stop appearing. 6 other ways of being human, and every one of them ran out of room within a few thousand years of us showing up. Not all of them left completely. 1 to 2% of you is Neanderthal. If your ancestry runs through Southeast Asia or Oceania, several percent of you is Denisovan. Those aren't inert souvenirs either. Inherited archaic DNA is doing active work in human immune response, in skin and hair, in metabolism, in the ability to breathe at altitude. We didn't just take their valleys, we took the parts of them that worked, and we're still using them. For 300,000 years, being human meant looking across a river valley at somebody who was clearly a person, clearly not your kind of person, and then figuring out what to do about that. 6 times we figured it out. 6 times. It came out the same way. We're what's left. There's nobody else to measure ourselves against. Nobody who solved the problem differently. No other mind on this planet that can look back at us and understand what it's seeing. We call that winning. It's also the loneliest possible outcome, and we're the only species that has ever been in a position to notice. The bones are still coming out of the ground. Dragon Man sat down a well for 85 years before anybody knew what he was.